again. Yes, yes. So last Sunday we started our fall book study. We got a jump on fall. And we started the fall book study, a gem of a book called Row, Row, Row Your Boat. Living Life in the Divine Flow. It's a wonderful book by a longtime Unity person who was here at Unity on Greenville for many years, Stephen Lane Taylor. And the whole book is built on the words of that song that we grew up with. The row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, merrily, merrily. Life is but a dream. Those words guided Steve to live life fully, completely, and very differently than he had been living it. So today we'll continue that, and I want to share another story from his book. One morning, Steve was scheduled to have a meeting with a colleague at 9 a.m. sharp. He had a very specific piece of very important information to share with this colleague, and 9 o'clock was the only time to do that. At 8:55, the gentleman had another meeting and would be busy, and at 9:05, he had to rush off to the airport to catch a plane out of town. So Steve had that very small window of opportunity. Now, at this time, he lived in L.A., so we've all read about the horrendous traffic in L.A. This morning was no different. He sat on the highway, not moving. And of course, the feelings that come with that, he knows that he's going to miss his appointment. He considered exiting the highway and just zigzagging through all the neighborhoods to get to his destination. But then something told him not to do that, which was really counterproductive to Steve, because sitting there was doing nothing. But exiting, at least he was doing something. He was taking control and doing something. But on this particular morning, Steve listened to that still small voice, and he sat in traffic. He sat as patiently as he could, and he inched along the highway. He arrived at his office at 9:15. So in his mind, he had missed the appointment. Now, he admitted to being a die-in-the-wool control freak. His words, not mine. So being a need to be in control, arriving late, it was very frustrating. But he did follow that still small voice. So it's 9:15, he arrived at his office, and he's having some self-talk about, well, it'll be all right, it'll be okay. And he makes his way to his office. And the elevator doors open, and lo and behold, there's the gentleman who he needed to see. That gentleman's meeting ran late, so there he was, at the perfect place, at the perfect time, to share with his colleague the very important information that he had to share. Now, if Steve had arrived a minute earlier, or even a minute later, he would have missed this opportunity. So that universe supported him in reaching his goal. Now, there's a couple of things in this story that are pretty easy to miss. And I'm going to take us to our Unity second principle, that we create our experiences by the activity of our thinking. Now, we know that there's some extenuating circumstances around that because we all live in the realm of that collective consciousness. So the fact that Steve found himself sitting in traffic was something that he couldn't control. That was a collective experience. But what Steve could control was his contribution to that experience. And on this day, Steve popped in a soothing CD to keep himself centered and at peace. He contributed that peacefulness to the collective consciousness. Now, there were probably days that it was easier to contribute something else. Have you been there? Yes? Yes, we've all been there. But on this day, he was connected to his source. He was connected to his true self. And he chose to contribute the peacefulness, the gentleness of the soothing music. And another detail that I noticed that I have a really strong belief about, and that is the universe upholds our most deeply held intentions. Those intentions that we hang on to, that we hold deeply in our heart or in our mind. Now, on the surface, it might appear that Steve's intention was to be at the office at 9 o'clock to meet his colleague. But the 9 o'clock is just a detail. His most deeply held intention was to meet this person and to share this important information. That was his most deeply held intention. Ta-da! The movements of the universe supported and honored his most deeply held intention. The rest was just the stuff of the world, the details of the day. It did not matter how that happened, just that it happened. You see those moments in your life where you think that it's all gone awry, it's all gone to hell in a handbasket? Not so. It all happens. The universe supports us. Now, Steve had to do some things to be an active participant in that. If he had not attuned to that still small voice that said, sit still and be in this traffic. Don't jump off the highway and do your thing. Sit and be still. If he had heard that inner voice and chosen not to follow it, have you ever done that? Yes. Yes, we all have, if he had chosen not to follow that. And also, I want us to remember that it is because Steve was willing to change the way he lived his life, to release that need to be in charge and in control of every little thing, or to think you're in control. From being that in control of everything person to living in the flow, the divine flow of life person. And that story is a great example of how finely tuned our intuition is. Every single moment, every nuance of our life, we are guided by that inner voice. But in the chaos, the noise of the world, we often don't hear it. We can't hear it for all the noise and the leaf blowers and the radio and the television and all that we're pouring into ourselves rather than pausing to be with ourselves. That intuition is just that finely attuned. And when we practice being attuned to it, if you want to know where to go to make a purchase, ask. If you want to know the safest destination for a getaway, ask. If you want to know what route to take to work, ask. As Matthew 7:8 reminds us to ask, and it is given. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be open for you. For whoever asks, receives. Anyone who seeks will find. And anyone who knocks, that door will be open. And that's exactly what Steve experienced on that morning. He was open. Now this flow, this current of energy, which is the basis of this book, is really powerful. And Steve calls that the stream of life. Last week we talked about the boat being us, and then there's the stream that we live in. It's that divine flow. Now that can be really clear and concise, or it can be very confusing and not very clear. And it can be subtle, that we have to be paying very close attention to get it. Just like Steve had to hear, don't exit. Can you imagine his mind sitting there in traffic, knowing that he's missing his appointment, his mind just spinning, well, if I just get off, I can go here and I can do that and I can turn and end up there. Can you imagine what it took for him to stop all of this and to hear, stay, and be still? Can you imagine the willpower it took? And yet, that's what happens. As we practice living in the flow, we learn to trust it in those really small decisions, finding a parking space, etc. And as we practice that, we build evidence. We build our own inner trust to know that on those really big decisions, those times in life when a seeming disaster shows up, that we can trust that our intuition, that inner guidance, that still small voice, that power and presence is there guiding us through even what appears to be a disaster. Long ago, when my children, who are now full-grown adults, were in elementary and middle school, it was just after my spouse at the time and I had gone our separate ways. I was released from a job. I had never been released from a job. I had never had a time that I didn't work. So you can imagine, I worked for a long-term care community that had heavy penalties and fines and paybacks from Medicare, not a good thing. So when layoffs happened, I was in the sales and marketing team. I couldn't be a caregiver to any of the residents or patients, so I was one of the first to go. They kept all of the caregivers because they were providing care to all of the beautiful people. So here I sat as a single mom with 3 kids. Panic is an understatement. And the very next day, I went to a networking meeting and I announced myself as a free agent. Something very interesting happened. By the end of that gathering, I had 2 interviews and another contact to reach out to. I was frantic, though. I was so worried about the hows of life. How would I feed my kids? How would I pay my mortgage? How would I pay for gas and the car payment? How? All of the hows that you can imagine, they were in me, all of them. But by the end of the week, I had a job offer. And as I sat and realized that with accrued vacation, with unemployment compensation, I was going to be okay. But you see, this job wouldn't start until August, which was 2-3 months away. So I added everything up, I got out my handy calculator, and I was going to make it. Everything was going to be okay. In fact, everything was going to be better than okay, because my children were home for the summer, and so was I. So that summer, my young children and I had a great time. We went to the pool, we played, we swam, we enjoyed being with each other. And truth be told, I savored that time. Truth be told, I needed a break from that corporate world of, you know that, I see heads shaking, that I needed a break from that corporate world. The universe was supporting my highest and best good. How about that? And I didn't need to worry. You know the scripture that says, consider the lilies of the field. Don't worry about what you're going to eat or what you're going to wear. The birds, they don't gather and sow, and yet they never go hungry. It's not necessary for us to worry about any of that. And the scripture goes on to say, consider the lilies of the field. Even Solomon in all of his finery is not clothed more beautiful than they. We don't have to worry. We can choose to worry. So how do we recognize that inner guidance? How do we recognize that that is what's moving us and inspiring us? Sometimes it's a thought that suddenly pops into our head that we're not sure exactly where it came from. It's not one of our routine thoughts. We feel inspired by the thought. Sometimes it's that still small voice that says, don't exit the highway. Or do this. And we listen to it. Sometimes it's an image that appears. Sometimes it's a face of a person to find out that that person has what we are looking for, the information that we need, the resources that we want. Sometimes it's a sensation that gets our attention. It's always available to us. It's always there for us. It's that which is always moving in us. When you choose the socks you put on in the morning, when you choose the breakfast you eat each day, it's that which causes a stirring in you. It causes your vibration to change. You can feel the tingling, the incitement around an idea. We're never without that. That's the divine in us. That's the stream of life moving us always forward, always forward. And there's some things for us to know about this stream, this current of energy. It underlies everything that exists in the universe. It's the energy that's in the trees, the flowers, the grasses, and all of our lovely animals. It's the energy that moves us always to our highest good. And like I said, even when an apparent disaster shows up, that divine energy, that stream, that flow of life is always moving us because life wants to continue. It always moves us to our highest good. And what is our highest good? It's always good. It's always good. It's always good for all. It's not just good for me and awful for you. It's not just good for a small group of people. It's good for all. That's our highest good. It's always unlimited. Always. There is no end to the goodness that we can experience. It's always an experience of good. It's always an experience of harmony, of peace, of joy, of tranquility. And we have those moments. We can call them out. You may have had one yesterday. You may have had those moments today. And we can live more of those moments by not being of the world, being in the world but not of the world, by living from inside here. I heard Darcy said she worked in her yard yesterday, and it brought a beautiful image because I worked in my yard yesterday. Who else worked in their yard yesterday? Who else did something that felt peaceful and tranquil? Yes. When we pay attention and do those things in life that bring us peace, the things that bring us joy. That's our highest good, because that's living from within. Saying no thank you to the enticements of the world, which are many. And finally, Steve shares this, and this is a very important thought. He shares that the divine flow leads us, it directs us, the divine flow informs us, it guides us, it inspires us, and it supports us. But the divine flow doesn't live for us. Remember those oars that we talked about last week that were our free will? So we get to choose. Are we going to live that life guided, or are we going to do it our way? Have you done it your way? Yes, unfortunately I have. And we have stories for you. Yes, we choose that. It's the oars of our boat that are our free will. So Steve says this. We have to pick up our oars, and we have to row, row, row. Namaste. And you know how it goes. Your left hand over your right shoulder, right hand over your left shoulder, and give yourself a big old squeeze. You have been hugged and loved by me.